Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of Boston Borough Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Paul Gleeson. I am chairing the committee today, and on my right is Councillor Susan Welbury, who is my vice chair. Before we start, I've got some household details. I would like to remind everyone in attendance this evening that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Please note that the meeting will be transmitted to assist with the will be recorded, transcribed to assist in the preparation of the minutes. So please use the microphone. Those in attendance of the meeting, please ensure that you do so through the microphones. And can you make sure that your phones are turned off or put to silence? Finally, please be advised that any abuse or intimidation of any kind will not be tolerated. Any disturbance will result in the meeting being adjourned. Anyone who is deemed to breach these requirements will be warned and asked to refrain. And if the behaviour persists, they will be requested to leave the meeting. We now go to the preliminary part one. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for this meeting from councillors Patsy Marson, Emma Cresswell and Lena Savikian.
And are there any members have any interest they wish to declare? No. I will now open the meeting. Just a minute. Yeah. So you have in front of you the minutes. Are they agreed? Thank you. I will sign them.
Questions, Chair?
Yeah.
Just Chair.
So are there any questions from members of the public?
There are none for this meeting, Chair.
Thank you. So now we come to part two of the agenda, which is the budget overview 26-27. Our first item of business this evening is the budget overview, which starts on page 27 of the agenda, the supplementary agenda pack. This was presented by the Director of Finance, Section 151 Officer, Russell Stone. Russell, would you like to present your report?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've got a presentation to run through, if that's okay, just to try and set out the position. I'm conscious as well that the papers were a few days late going out, so I think with your indulgence, I'll sort of run through a little bit of the detail in the presentation to explain what's going on and what's moving, because there is quite a lot happening this year in terms of the financial position. Yeah, are you okay? Do you want to move the mic closer or further away? Yeah. But yeah, if at any point sort of drift off, let me know, and I'm happy to adjust and hopefully get back on track. What I would say, Chairman, if members have questions as we go through, I'm happy to pause and take them rather than try and save them up to the end. I'm conscious, given the nature of what we're talking about, it's probably easier to address the issues as we get to them rather than try and go back at a later point. So in terms of what's hoping to cover, talk a little bit about the role of scrutiny, so what we're here for tonight. Quick recap in terms of the process that we followed to pull the budgets together. As I mentioned, you will see in the reports there is a huge amount of change this year in terms of how the settlement works and the implications for our financial outlook. So I'll explain a little bit about that. And you'll be aware there has been a process over the sort of spring, summer into autumn, looking at budget options. And I'll give a bit of an overview around what's come out through that process. Then obviously also cover off the draft budget before looking at what happens from this point forward. So in terms of the role of scrutiny, from my perspective, it's a really key part of the process. I think having that independent review, that independent challenge and observation of what's gone forward, opportunity to bring new ideas and a fresh perspective is absolutely critical to what we're trying to do. You'll know yourselves that it's very easy when you're in a process that if you're not careful, you don't see the wood for the trees. So I think that's really where scrutiny comes in for me, that they can take that step back and bring something fresh to the conversation. But in terms of the process of how we've got here, so we started looking at the budgets back in May time. That's when it was initially kicked off. Those that were here at the point would have noticed that the budget that was set this time last year for 26-27 included an efficiency requirement of just short of £3 million, and that was a combination of the IDB funding issue that we've got, and also a more general budget gap as well. Now, what I would say is, given the net budget for Boston is about 12.5 million, that is quite a significant number in terms of the outlook and where we're heading as a council. So with that in mind, the process that was put in place in terms of the Star Chamber process really was almost being created on a worst case scenario. So services were asked to review their areas of spend, look for opportunities where that could be reduced or income generated, and at the same time identify any cost pressures that needed to be met, given the nature of the economy and service change that were taking place. So having reviewed the budgets, assistant directors, budget managers then attended the Star Chamber meetings through the August time, and then sort of from that process onwards, probably through to November, December time, when we started to verify proposals, actually nail down what could then be included in the budget. So quite a bit of work to get us to this point. And then obviously what's happened is on the 17th of December, we got the provisional finance settlement. We had been promised it would be early this year, but as you can tell, 17th of December is not particularly early. I think it was pretty much within a day or two, the last day that it could actually have been released before the House rose for Christmas. In the figures, we'll see massive amount of changes come through, reflecting 2 autumn budgets, policy statement, spending review, and the fair funding review as well, which I'll come on to in a few moments. But a huge amount being squeezed in terms of the changes that are taking place. I think probably the most positive part of the settlement is we have got, for the first time in probably close to a decade, some indicative figures for more than 1 year as well. Now, it does work very much in the same way as we set our budget. So we sort of set the budget for the next year and we create forecasts for the following years. So the settlement will still go back through the member process, or the MP process, should I say, for actual approval and ratification. But we've got indicative figures at least for years 2 and 3 of our plan, which is really helpful in terms of our longer term planning. In terms of a few of the headlines that are coming through the settlement, and I won't spend too long on this, but hopefully I'll explain some of the key changes. In reality, I think pretty much every number we have is changing, and quite significantly in a lot of cases. So you'll be aware that the fair funding review has been kicking around for a few years now, and it's been delayed and delayed and delayed. that is now being implemented. So for the coming financial year, we will have an entirely new settlement structure. I think the key drivers behind it are to simplify the system, and I think arguably make it fairer, although I think making it simpler and fairer at the same time are probably two slightly contradictory outcomes. Going forward, there'll be a much greater focus in terms of population and deprivation being what drives the income levels. And I think the thing for me that it loses is there was probably a reason that the formulas were complicated, and that is local government is complicated, no two areas are the same. And having some of the changes that are being pushed through on the basis of simplifying the system and not helping us as the council in terms of our funding outlook. So just picking out a couple of examples, the flood and coastal protection element has been removed, as has the rural sparsity factor as well. So in terms of things that were pretty important for us in the settlement, they are disappearing. Would just flag in here as well, obviously when I'm talking about the settlement, I'm talking about core spending power, because that's the government sort of key metric for assessing councils and their funding positions. So what that means is it brings in council tax that raised locally, and various grants as well that get lumped into the numbers. But in terms of business rates, which alongside council tax is the biggest element, a huge amount of change is being put through. So you appreciate over the last few years we've been able to benefit from growth that's occurred locally in terms of business rates. That is now being included in the main settlement figures and redistributed across the country. So our growth will get shared out in the same way as we will get a share of people's growth as well. Beyond that, there are a number of things that directly impact businesses and ourselves as well. The full revaluation of all property rates. There's a move from 2 multipliers in terms of they used to have a small business and a large business. There are now 5 multipliers, which makes it a lot more complicated and potentially for some larger businesses much more expensive as well. In terms of how the funding feeds through into our retained position, there has also been a move from net rates payable into gross rates payable. I can only imagine how exciting that sounds, but in reality, that could potentially have quite a big number or big impact for us in terms of the financial position. Any discounts that previously would have been picked up by government now, it potentially impacts our bottom line. So we need to be very careful with that. And you might remember as well that we've been part of a business rate pool for the last number of years. We had looked to remain in the pool for next year, or at least we'd expressed an interest subject to receiving the provisional settlement. One of the pool partners, on the back of receiving the settlement, pretty much immediately issued notice that they didn't want to be in the pool. So on the basis of that, that means that there will not be a business rate pool for next year. Now, in reality, the way that the government has structured the new business rate system, it potentially means there wouldn't have been as big a gain by being in the pool. So it's potentially not a big loss to us. And there are potentially some different things we can do by not being in the pool. But obviously that avenue is now closed off to us. So we're looking at alternative ways of maximising our position through the processes we've got left. Mention council tax. Again, this is probably the one bit that's not moving massively. So the referendum limits remain in place. So we're looking at the greater of 3% or £5 in terms of where our council tax could go. Funding floor doesn't directly impact us, but we're not far off it. But we do now have an interesting position where there are 2 different funding floors in place. So it could be you're kept at 0, or it could be you're at -5%. As I say, it doesn't impact us, but it's an interesting dynamic that we have a differential funding floor in place. I don't think we've ever had that system before in local government finance, where you were getting different levels of treatment. Would also flag that the recovery grant will continue, and that will continue at the same level as we were receiving it last year, which is quite nice. There's also some consolidation of grants that have in the system and been brought into the overall settlement number. So homelessness, rough sleeping and domestic abuse grants have been ring fenced and then consolidated into the settlement. So we can see those numbers and they form part of our core spending power, but we have to use them for the purpose that they've been set out. Probably two other things just to mention that aren't on the slide. First one is in terms of internal drainage boards or the grant funding that were being issued to support the cost of the levies from the internal drainage boards. It has been confirmed that the £5 million grant will continue again for this coming year. Within the settlement, there is also a question around whether that should continue or not beyond this coming year. So that's potentially indicates where government are heading with this. And then the other thing that's not mentioned on there is obviously we will be bringing in food waste collections during next year. The way government have produced the numbers, they have said that the funding for food waste, so the new burden that we're picking up, is already included in the numbers that they have distributed to us. So there is no additional funding for food waste collections from next year onwards. So I think, as I said earlier, I think pretty much every number we've got is changing in some way, which makes our lives a bit more interesting, but also gives us a chance to do things differently, which is good. In terms of how that works through into our settlement position and the funding that we have, as I mentioned before, government use core spending power as their key driver. What you can see in here is government in last year or this current year estimated that we would receive around £12.2 million in funding support. So a combination of business rates we retain, the council tax, the grants that are now being rolled in, and the recovery grant mechanism that was in place. If we look at the column headed 2026-27, you can see that number jumps to just short of 13 million. So on the face of it, it looks like we've actually received about £750,000 more in spending power than we've had previously. What I would just say is there are a few things in there which are potentially skewing that figure a little bit. So the first one is this includes some increases that have been applied to homelessness, rough sleeping and domestic abuse grant, around £600,000 that looks like it's gone up by. What I would say is previously some of those grant funds have been received in a different way. So we're not necessarily comparing like with like in terms of how that number feeds through. The other thing I would mention, you'll see in there that there is an assumed increase around council tax as well. So government make an assessment of how much council tax they think we can retain locally. So it's not necessarily what will happen, but they make an assessment of how much they think we will retain, and they increase that number and they include that in the core spending power. So if you were to remove the amount that we're retaining locally and that ring fence grant, which isn't necessarily comparing like with like, what you'll actually see is our funding for next year in terms of government grant drops by about £55,000. But obviously that is masked by those wider changes that are taking place. And then you do see if you follow that sort of lower down blue row along, you can see that for 27-28 we get a core spending power increase of just over £100,000, and then for 28-29 just under £100,000. But again, both of those numbers include an assumed increase in council tax. So actually the amount of grant that we're retaining is dropping year on year. and you've got the percentages there as well, which show that there is no way that that spending power is keeping pace with inflation. So in reality, we are receiving a cut in terms of the actual cash we have available to us.
Councillor Dorian.
Yeah, quick question, because it's I do have a list of questions, Russell, but this is just sprung to mind, and you did say jump in. So on the increase in the council tax revenue that government predict or say that we should expect, do you have an idea of how much that is rooted in the annual increase should full council vote for an increase in council tax, balanced with the number of new homes that would be expected to come online? What's the split amongst the increase that's expected, please?
Yes, well, if I can, Chems, the next thing I was going to show you, if that's all right, is and this is a little bit of a yeah, I don't want to call it an accountant's table because it's got all the wrong headings in it to be an accountant's table, but it's a little bit complex in terms of how this works through, because we've sort of got one column with millions of pounds, then we've got the bandy equivalent properties, then we've got pounds for council tax, and then percentages for change and collection rates. What this shows is within the government's figures and how they've calculated it, they have essentially assessed that we will collect around £155,000 more in. Sorry, looking at the wrong number. They said we will actually collect around £42,000 more in council tax than we genuinely will do. But as well, in this table, what you have there is the figure of 15.2, which is essentially how much government think it will be moving by in terms of the tax base compared to where we actually are. So it's a very complicated way of saying within the numbers, government have overestimated what they actually think we're going to get.
If you come back, is any of that predicated on the number of new homes that we're expected to build? Or is it all rooted in increases to the current properties we have?
There is an element that is, yeah, and I think if I can find the right bit on the slide. So in terms of, it's about halfway down, so they have assumed 170.4 in terms of the actual property increase, and that again is different based on what we actually think it will be. Low.
Councillor Richard Austin.
If it's time for general questions.
No, I think we'll have the general questions when we come. This is questions on what the office is actually reporting at the moment.
Right, okay, I'll delay my questions then.
Okay. Anybody else while we've got a break? No.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I think probably the next key bit to have a look at. Obviously, I mentioned that we had the Star Chamber process. I think it's safe to say that through that exercise, a huge amount of pressures came forward, as did a huge number of opportunities around saving money. In terms of the pressures, this just offers a little summary of what came out of the system, and you can see there in excess of £800,000 worth of pressures were flagged for the coming year. A few of the big ones was pulled out. So I think in reality, the majority of items were sort of smaller issues that just needed to be corrected. But there are a few larger ones, as you can see in there. So first one at almost £200,000 was the uplift on the PSPS contract price. I should say, since that was reflected, conversations have been taken with PSPS, and there is an expectation that was based on, I think, a 5% uplift, and it's likely to be a fair bit lower, more like 1.5%. So that will reduce significantly and well below 100,000 in terms of the cost that we'll need to find. There is also a cost in there we've had to reflect of just shy of 100,000 around housing benefit payments that we can't recover because of the nature of the people that, or the organisations that are claiming them. And again, there is some work taking place to try and get measures in place so we can recover that cost. But so far it's had to be built in. Members are probably aware as well that we have to deliver a local plan, so we've needed to reflect that in the budget. And then there are a couple of items where they are very much demand led in terms of the income that is generated. So for Borough, both bereavement services and planning applications, just had to correct the income targets for those going forward. In terms of savings or efficiencies, again, a huge number of smaller items here. I think it's safe to say that budget holders have really been through their budgets quite forensically and stripped out elements that they can do. And that is reflected in some of the income target or the savings that we have, and particularly the bigger items. A lot of what's in there is smaller in nature. So we've grouped together a few bits just to pull out what has been happening. So in terms of ICT, across the board delivering just under £60,000 worth of savings by reducing costs. Building control performed relatively well, so we're looking at increasing the income target there. And also we received some funding around the Renters' Right Bill, which we'll be putting towards balancing the budgets.
Yeah, could I ask a question? Could you go back to the previous table, please, Russell? Being as you brought it up. So the PSPS contract, which category did that fall into? Was that finance or?
Yes, that sits in finance.
Finance. And so you've said that is that was predicated on a 5% uplift, which has since reduced to would you say 1.5?
Yes.
So 1.5. So if we follow that figure along the table, the finance figure, which goes up exponentially, then are these figures based on the 5% uplift or the 1.5?
Yes, through Chairman. Yes, these are based on the 5%, and it's a 5% year on year as well. So it's in essence 5% for first year, and then 10% a little bit for year 2, and then 15%, which is why you can see it ramping up so significantly. Obviously, that's not just the PSPS. That's also got things like the housing benefit on recovery element in there as well. But you can see that's a significant number. What I would say is, obviously, if we had a more traditional arrangement in terms of some of the back office functions and they were still in-house, obviously what we wouldn't see is an individual contract price. What we'd see is the price going up to reflect pay awards and things of that nature. So whilst it does seem a little bit stark when it's there as a number and the inflation's pulled out, in reality, if we had a different arrangement, you'd also have the same or a similar impact at least. And I think the position we've arrived at in terms of it being more like a 1.5% change. Obviously, the pay awards, we would expect that to be more than 1.5%. So actually, the efficiencies that PSPS have delivered will put us in a much better position than we would.
Thank you. But Chair, can I just finally ask on that line then, the finance line, what figures are we looking at, the 5% or the 1.5%? Are these going to change, in other words?
Yes, these will change.
So they're based on the 5%?
Yes.
And they've to be reduced down. Okay, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, and to be really helpful, I should say that's not the only number that's going to change. And I think in terms of the position we find ourselves in, so this is a sort of an assessment by expenditure type or income type of where we'll find ourselves with the budget for next year. As I say, there is quite a lot. Well, I say that the vast majority of the budget has been developed and is there and good to go, but there are a few items which potentially or have the potential to result in significant swings, which we're still to finalise. Obviously, we mentioned the PSPS contract price, and that update needs to be reflected in these figures. Given what I was saying earlier around the business rate pool, that element still needs to be worked through. And in reality, the deadline that government have set for submission of the business rate position is not till the end of this month. So given we tend to get numerous fresh releases of the information that actually saw new versions of the form that need completing, that won't be developed until probably the end of the month, or at least not finalised until the end of the month. Obviously, the finance settlement is still provisional, and there is a chance that between provisional and finance, or between provisional and final, the numbers will change. We also need to ensure that we've fully reflected the food waste cost and the PR funding that's come in. And then on the back of that, every time we change a number, it also has an impact on our investment position. So potentially the investment income and any borrowing costs that we have will also vary depending on how those numbers go through. So I suppose the key point I'm making is this is where we are today, and what we've arrived at is a position where we're currently about 1.3 million short of reaching a fully balanced position. In previous years, we've split that between sort of general efficiencies and the IDB efficiency requirement. But that is in total, that is the gap that we're currently looking. Obviously, what we are doing is we've got a good 2 or 3 weeks left, and we're now trying to refine those proposals best we can to bring that gap down and get it to balance. What I would just highlight as well, though, is as we go into year 2 of the plan, the gap does jump to about 2.1 and then 2.8 million the year after. So you see that the numbers are sort of going against us slightly in terms of where we want to be. But given we came into the year with, at a headline level at least, a potential £3 million gap, having gained down to 1.3 shows we're going the right way, but we're not where we want to be yet. And then just in terms of the flip side to that, so if we're going to spend around £12.7 million, current forecasts around financing with that efficiency item in there show that we should generate around £12.7 million in funding. What you will see in here, and this is a summarised version, I will call it. We can see some of the impacts of the funding changes and the system changes that are taking place. So on the first line, you'll see retained business rates looks relatively similar to the previous year. But at the same time, the line below that, Section 31 grant disappears completely. And in essence, that Section 31 grant was part of retained business rates, but it's where we're being compensated because government had changed the scheme nationally and we needed the funding back. So actually, that's a much lower number that we'll receive going forward. You'll also see on the flip side, though, revenue support grant increases significantly. So it goes from just under £500,000 to about £3.5 million, which is obviously a positive for us. But then new homes bonus disappearing out completely. And you can see some of the grants in there that get wrapped in to the settlement figure, but again, some will be in the service areas. But hopefully that gives a little bit of a flavour for how things are moving. In terms of what happens from here, obviously we're going to be working as hard as we can to get that budget gap reduced down and get that to a position that's more manageable for us. But we'll be looking at getting the draft budgets to Cabinet on the 18th of February and then on to Council from there, where we'll agree the budgets and set the council tax. And of course, then we get the fun bit where we send out the bills, which everyone really enjoys. But I think at that point, Chairman, obviously it's up to the panel how they want to take this forward. But alongside scrutinising the draft position, it might well be that members have either burning areas that they would like us to add or at least investigate or to put forward to the Cabinet, or equally there could be opportunities in there that members are aware of that they'd like us to investigate around generating income or reducing costs, and be happy to take those members have. So, I'll stop at that point, Chairman, and take any questions.
Can I start with just some clarification with you? How will next year's budget be developed, assuming that the local government changes are beginning? So in other words, is this our last budget per se, or how is it going to work?
Yes, and that is a very interesting question, Chairman. So I think we will have to deliver at least one more budget beyond this one. Current timetable says we go into the new organisation on the 1st of April 2028. So we'll have the 6-7 and the 7-8 budget as a minimum. I don't think any council that takes over from us would appreciate it if they got to the 1st of April and there was no draft budget there. So we'll have to do various amounts of work with the sort of the shadow council as it's developed, to make sure we've got a reasonable starting point for them, as well as a, if you like, a decent ending for ourselves as well. I think in terms of the budget and the flexibility that we might have, and again, assuming reorganisation happens to the timetable it currently is, there is a reasonable chance that at some point in the next 12 months, there will be some restrictions imposed on us around how we spend our money, what authorisations we need, and what we can commit to in terms of contractual obligations and the like. So this is potentially, whilst not our final budget, it's potentially the final one that we can deliver unfettered.
Councillor Richard Austin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, that brings me on to another question relating to the future. So this is the last budget that this council will be fully responsible for. The next one will be rather a hybrid situation, which makes me wonder about reserves. To what extent have we got available reserves that we want to make sure are spent for the benefit of Boston? And I'm rather, I think many of us would be rather concerned that if more reserves than were absolutely necessary were handed over to this nebulous future body, that may well not be spent for the benefit of the people of Boston. So what level of reserves might come into this category that we've got to consider at this budget?
Yes, yeah. Again, this is an absolutely pertinent, if slightly dangerous question to answer. So I think there are probably a few things to bear in mind. One being, we don't know for definite that LGR will happen. I think at the moment we're all assuming it will, and that a reasonable likelihood. But if we go and spend the family silver this year, and then whatever happens nationally or internationally, they say, well, maybe not the priority right now. Can you carry on for a bit longer? We potentially leave ourselves with a little bit of a headache. Should say in the context of those draft numbers as well, that I think the first call on reserves would probably be to make sure that the budget did balance. So if you take even the next 2 years, you're probably looking at about 3.5 million based on current numbers that we'd need to keep council the right side of things. But having said that, in terms of the specific question, at this point in time, we're probably looking at, and Nicole might give me a kick at this stage, we're looking at about £8-9 million potentially as a maximum of what could be available for investment or use. Obviously, what we would need to do is make sure that anything we put forward was appropriate use of public funds and not seen to just be spending it because it was ours and we didn't want someone else to have it, which I'm no way suggesting would be the intention, but we just need to make sure we badged it appropriately to make sure we were on the right side of it.
So Councillor Pierpoint, then Councillor.
Thanks, Chairman. Russell, you said there was no additional funding for food waste. Do I take it that when that comes into play, have we factored in any cost at all of delivering that service? And also, if we have, roughly, do we know what it's going to be? And also, the second question is, as a council, are we likely to charge for that service, or will it be included in the council tax rates? We charge for brown bins. I just wonder whether we're charging for the food waste service.
Yes, and there are a few bits, and apologies again because some of this is going to be slightly contradictory, but almost answering in reverse if I can. In terms of charge for service, no. In terms of residential provision, we can't charge. One of the things that did come in as part of the Environment Act was a requirement, if you provide a commercial waste service, to also offer a commercial food waste collection service, and that element could be charged for. So that's something that we'll build into that offering going forward. In terms of the funding, this is where it's slightly contradictory. Whilst we're not getting an additional payment for food waste collection, we are receiving EPR payments, so extended producer responsibility. Now, I think in reality, we'll need to work a little bit of magic in the budgets, but into the bottom line impact, the two can potentially net off the impact. What we have been required to do, though, and what has been made very clear to us by PAC UK, which is the organisation sort of administering the EPR system, is the EPR payment should be used for general recycling costs and to mitigate the impact of that, to basically drive down the cost of packaging waste and to pay for the cost of what is in there. At the same time, if you have a conversation with a civil servant, part of their argument for not providing clearly identifiable funding for food waste is obviously we have reserves and we're also getting EPR funding. So whilst on the one hand we're being told it has to be used for a particular purpose, it's also being pointed towards us that we can use that for this reason. So that's where the contradiction comes in, but something that we'll work through in the background. In terms of the overall cost, I'm trying to look over Nicole's shoulder and failing slightly miserably. But in reality, I think we can contain that within the level of EPR funding. Yeah, so we're looking at around £500,000 for the first year, which is only a partial year, and then around about £1 million thereafter for the full year delivery. So some quite significant numbers. And just for context, in terms of the EPR position, we're currently forecasting we'll receive about 750, maybe just under 740, yeah, in terms of EPR payments. We do have some, if you like, saved up already, so that will help mitigate the impact. But you'll see that over the course of 2 or 3 years, we will soon find ourselves the wrong side of that equation. I think does that answer all the questions?
I think I'm happy with that, Russell. Thank you. Nearly called you Richard there.
So then, Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Russell, for this report. It's nicely laid out. If I can just take you back to table 5 on page 37, can you kind of just give us a bit of clarity on your thinking why income and investment income is going to drop so much between the years?
Yes, he says with absolute confidence. So in terms of the income line, and I'm just trying to just double check. If you look on that against the transfer payments as well, you'll see that transfer payments drop quite significantly, and this relates to the housing benefit subsidy elements. So there's essentially a bit of a contra there going on that's impacting both lines. In terms of investment income, this is basically driven by two things. One, how much money we've got, and two, where interest rates are. As you'll appreciate, interest rates are falling or forecast to fall, so we've had to reflect that in our forecasts. But then also we've benefited from having some fairly significant grant funds come our way, and where that grant is received in advance, it means we can, say, stick it in the bank. We very rarely use the bank, but we can invest that money, and that makes a return pending the point at which we need to actually utilise the funding. Obviously, as we spend the money, or as we spend reserves and cash balances, that diminishes the amount that we actually have to invest, so the return we get drops at that point.
Thank you for the explanation. I'm not quite sure the interest rates are going to drop sufficiently over the next 12 months, but we'll obviously have to wait and see. And as you say, with the extra grants coming in where we can take extra income from having the surplus, it just seems surprising that it dropped so much, the investment income, compared to this year. Thanks a lot.
Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just go to page 38, and when we have the contributions from reserves and contributions to reserves, I just would like to know the contributions to reserve, where will it come from? Because it seems to me like taking money from the reserves and putting money back in the reserves.
Yes, and that's it. Look at that, I did my magic. But yeah, so in terms of money going in, essentially we build up to undertake elections on a 4-yearly cycle, so that's part of it. And then also the property rental income, which I think is the property funds that we have, and making a provision for essentially MRP to fund the activity that's been undertaken previously, and make sure that come the end of their asset lives, we've got the financing in place to clear that up.
Yep.
Just one thing, because we have considerations, item to reduce cost or generate income. That will be a very good business aspect, if we can do that. Do we need any consideration now, or probably later, or should we just email?
Yeah, through you, Chairman. I think there are probably two elements to this. I think if there are things that the committee would like the cabinet to consider, I think sort of airing those tonight and being able to capture that, so we can feed it into the wider decision making process, would be really useful. I think if there are sort of things that you think we could just investigate behind the scenes, and then like I say, happy for you to mention it, or drop me an email, or we can have a chat afterwards. And
Yeah, I think always.
Thank you. Just because on your explanation and your what you have said, we looked at the planning applications. They will be short of £47,000, and I think probably that's due to our probably being stiff and not being easy with other applicants to come and put their applications forward. Therefore, it will affect the way our income massively, because people, they will lose their trust in us. So therefore, probably one of the ideas is to be not easy, however, apply the rules, but be more friendly towards people or the applicants to bring their planning, so whatever it is, to us. And if we can help them and build that bridge with them, I think we can gain their confidence. Therefore, people will spread the word and we can make more money that way than having the negative words, because a negative word go much faster than the positive one, and it's happening all the time. And some people, they say in Boston that people all around the world have 2 eyes, but the Bostonians, they have 4 eyes. So the negative things, it slips away and people deal with it. So this is just one of my ideas that because you know, to ease these things and work with the people and make the income much more easier. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, what we're being asked tonight to do is to sort of make recommendations and comments to Cabinet about the way the budget's going. I mean, we're not audit and governance, so we're not meant to be sitting here sort of saying, well, the maths is wrong, or anything particular. This is to come up with suggestions or ideas of where the budget maybe can go somewhere different if we have those ideas. So this is now your chance to do that. I mean, again, I'm happy to start. One of my concerns is it's following on slightly, I think, from what Councillor Austin said about reserves. Obviously, we sit here with some money that really was money that could have been spent historically in Boston and hasn't been. We've got it in reserve. And yes, I accept that we can't be profligate, but you know, looking at the way the future is going, some of the authorities that will be forming whatever new entity we got, assuming it happens, are actually coming in not with no debt and not with great amount of reserves. And so I do feel that we as a council should be looking to make sure that as far as we can, our local democracy that will be left here is as robust as it can be. So I do think we need to be talking to parish councils, and we are obviously considering things with potential of a new town council. But I do think we need to be making sure and going to parish council and saying, you know, how secure are you? You know, are there things that we could be helping with now that would make your future better? I mean, okay, silly. Just again, this is not something maybe necessarily real, but you know, solar panels on the roof of your village hall, or something along those lines, something that would actually make the parish council going forward slightly stronger in its financial position. Yeah, to ensure that the new town council, should it get formed, that is as strong as it can be. Because you know, my fear is that under any new system, Boston's going to lose a lot of its voice. And so I do think we need to make sure we are as strong as we can be locally. And I do think we need to be looking at that wider than just forming of the town council. That's a bit.
Russell, I wasn't privy to this Star Chamber thing. I presume it's all the officers having a look at where they can save loads of money, I would imagine. Do we know if that process was checked and double checked to see whether there's any other savings in there? Because, you know, people are asked to save money. And I know from my personal experience as a CEO in previous lives that people don't necessarily go right down to the bone. You know, they actually, you know, save a bit and then think that's it. How far have we gone with this sort of savings campaign and the process? And has somebody else, I mean, you weren't here, so obviously it's difficult for you to answer this one, but, you know, how far have we gone with that process of looking at how much we can save by each department? I don't know. Has anybody checked out there's any more room for mover?
Yes, through you, Chairman. Yeah, as you say, the process predates me a little, but as I understand it, it was a fairly rigorous process with some fairly stretching targets that were set by department area. That's obviously got us so far. I would maybe prefer to adopt a slightly different approach, which is one where I'm looking at Nicole because it's the likes of Nicole that often have the all the inside knowledge on these things. But I'd rather work with the likes of Nicole and the service areas and actually go through what they do, how they do it, the outcomes that are being achieved, and what's been sought, and just approach it in that slightly different, more collective way. The sense I get, which may be unfair, is the process almost felt like there was an element of fear and sort of more adversarial in terms of how it was structured, which, as you say, you run the risk that potential departments offer what they think they have to get through a process, as opposed to offering all that could have been offered. It's not to say that did happen, but I think there are different ways of going about it.
Thanks very much, sir. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair. Just I've got a couple of questions. Pay award. What pay award have you assumed? 3%. Is that set in stone, or is that still being discussed?
This is a terrible admission to make, but I'm not sure. 3% is what we've included. I think the negotiations are still ongoing.
So it could go.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the biggest costs, isn't it? When is that likely to be concluded?
Yeah, that's potentially the $1 million question. I do remember a time where, as a local government officer, you got your pay award agreed before the new year started, and it was fairly uncommon for it to drift into sort of April and potentially May. I'd have to admit, it seems to drift that much now that I've lost track of which years we've had the pay award for. So I think it will come through, but yeah, hopefully November 3.75% sounds like the answer for this year. Obviously, what we don't have is a figure for next year yet, so we're basing on best estimates, but still more to do.
Right. Well, that needs to be concluded fairly shortly, doesn't it, really? Because this could make a huge...
It would be very useful,
yeah.
Yes.
And the second thing is, just on a note about cost savings or an observation, really, I'm looking for a new waste contract. I'm very unhappy with in my current business, my current waste contractor. So I've had some meetings with Boston Borough Council about taking over my waste contract. I run a food factory, and I was pleasantly surprised on a business level of the terms that I was being offered as opposed to the commercial terms that I currently pay. In fact, it was rather surprising, shall we say, as I sit with my councillor hat on, what good value. And I'm just wondering how your contracts for such things as commercial waste collection are actually looked at and reviewed, because I think we're missing a trick, a big trick, based on my business. And is that something, an area that the Cabinet should be looking at, or maybe us as councillors should be looking at? Because when I look at the commercial rates that I currently pay to what I'm being offered by Boston Borough Council, I shall be snapping their hand off. And that's just one area. There may be other areas to look at. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, through you, Chairman. Yes, and I think commercial waste is potentially a big area for us. So we make a reasonable amount of income from it, obviously all on a cost recovery basis. That's the criteria we have to operate in. What I would say is we've recently appointed a new officer in that area who is looking at taking forward the commercial waste side. I would say we would always try to offer good value, and I think if we can deliver a service at a lower price, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. But equally, we need to make sure we are recovering all cost and both being competitive in our pricing, but also not running the risk that we could be accused of subsidising the function and undercutting private business as well, because that would potentially be just as bad as overcharging. So it's definitely one we can have a look at to make sure we're in the right sort of ballpark.
Chair, is it all right? I think you should look at it. I don't think you'll be accused of what the latter of what you've just said, but I do think it's worth, if we're looking, for savings and income. If we're looking for income, then I think that's definitely an area to look at. And it would still be best value and still meet all the criteria.
Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow on what Councillor Welbury has said. I did mention this situation a long time ago in the council. We are missing a lot of money by not collecting commercial waste in Boston town. There is a lot of shops, they take their waste themselves, other waste to their homes, or they take them to the collection places, and we're missing money there. If we have a group or a team who can go around and offer a good price for these people, we can make money through that. Because our vans usually Thursday, Wednesday and Saturday, they're always in town, so they can always collect from the shops. And I think we can gain some income in that. Thank you.
Councillor Izard.
Thank you, Chair. This government's done so many U-turns, I'm not even sure whether this still hands. I do remember somewhere along the line in the budget that they were looking at a kind of mansion tax on properties over 1 million, an increase in council tax. Is that still in legislation, or has that been kind of forgotten again?
Yes, through you, Chairman. From memory, it was included in the latest budget, but I don't think it comes into effect until a year or two's time. So it's sort of on the cards, but I think the finer details are probably still to be finalised as well.
So, has anybody else got any? Councillor Dorian.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask where the portfolio holder is? Because I had questions for the portfolio holder as well as the officers. No, I'm asking you, Chair.
Sorry, they're not. They're not here.
Right, because it's his paper, it's his report in conjunction with the 151 officer. So as a scrutiny panel, we should be scrutinising the executive's plans and their decisions. And it's very difficult to do when they're not in the room.
Okay, I will raise the topic with them. I mean, there is always there is an issue, obviously, where the portfolio holders should be at a scrutiny meeting at all. Traditionally, we never used to have them at scrutiny. But yes, but if members would, I will try and ensure that they are here.
Well, I think it's going to be essential, Chair, because I mean, you missed full council on Monday night when we had this ridiculous motion on notice that's going to prevent elected members from asking any more than one question at a full council meeting. And we were told that the place to do that questioning was in scrutiny committee. So it's going to be essential when the administration passes this ridiculous motion that we have portfolio holders here so that they can be questioned and held to account. So thank you. Russell, thank you for your report. Would you please confirm in cash terms, if you have them, whether the funding available for discretionary services rises or falls in real terms over the MTFS? And if it falls, by how much?
Yeah, for you, Chairman, I have to say I've not done the calculation to see how far it falls in real terms, but it does decline. And this is across all services. Now I can, going back to the slide there, you can see that for next year we're looking at just short of 13 million. With council tax, that rises to 13.1. So we're looking at over the 3 years about 2% rise in overall funding level. It will be quite some way behind inflation, I would expect. So in terms of the exact calculation, I've not done that compared to forecast rates.
Okay, is that something you could do for us, please, so that we've got that figure?
More than happy to do that, yes. And I think there are probably two elements to it. I think if we assumed that the inflation rate was going to be roughly in line with the target rate, you're talking 2% a year, so we're probably 4% behind. There's also the question of demand for services and growth in the borough. Potentially there's a few moving parts in there, but more than happy to do that.
But I am just talking about discretionary services, not mandatory.
Yes, I would say, if I can, Chairman, it's probably tricky to split out exactly because, for argument's sake, we have mandatory services, but only an element of what they do is mandatory. So it's potentially something that would be quite subjective in terms of the analysis around it. And for argument's sake, even looking at something like finance, it's a mandatory function. There's a responsibility that, in essence, the 151 sort of is given the resources that they require. Where do you draw the line on that in terms of what's a mandatory element, what's a discretionary element? So it will be a little bit muddy, but we'll do some analysis. Okay,
thank you. If I can continue, Chair.
Obviously, if you put in the assumptions you've made
Yeah.
in coming to the figures, then we'll know at least where they've come from. Yeah.
Okay, and as you've stated tonight, the budget's balanced through, well, this budget 26-27 is balanced through the use of 1.12 million of reserves, alongside rising efficiency requirements that are going to be due in later years or needed in later years. Could you state what year you think the MTFS, where this approach ceases to be sustainable without further council tax rises or additional use of reserves?
Yes, and yes, for you, Chairman. I think in terms of the efficiency requirement, you can see it grows year on year, and the table in the report takes us through 5 years, and we're up to about 3.8 billion.
Mm-hmm.
If there was no further action taken, we wouldn't make year 5, or we'd about make year 5. Obviously, the intention will be that over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, as long as we exist, we'll carry on looking for those efficiencies, those saving opportunities, and way to drive more income for the council, which at that point should reduce down that position. The thing is, you very clearly say though, if we don't take some action, we will run out of cash.
And I think the question I would have put to the portfolio holder, had they bothered to turn up, would be what services does he then expect that residents can anticipate they'll be either reduced or withdrawn completely? Because this is a never decreasing spiral that we're going down. So if I've got one last question for you, Russell, if that's okay. Could you identify, and it might be quite difficult, have you got a single assumption which, if you proved it was correct, would cause the entire MTFS to fail?
Through you, Chairman, there's probably not one single one, and I think what you can do is, and you'll know this, is that you can almost create the fan chart where you can build the Armageddon scenario with a whole series of pessimistic assumptions, and you can probably build one if you try hard enough where you put in all the positive assumptions and it comes back right for a long time. Obviously, what happens in terms of the assumptions that we build in is you try and take a balanced, pragmatic view around what is likely to be the outcome. So there's probably not one individual one that would make or break. But I think, as we touched on earlier, the single biggest area that we have in terms of expenditure is on people. So if for argument's sake, a pay award of 10, 15, 20% was announced, that would create some issues. But again, you'd probably be at an extreme end of the fan chart in terms of the assumptions to do it.
I think, Chair, in fairness, it's difficult to look at any one assumption that you might have made in this MTFS, but I'm curious to know what keeps you awake at night.
Currently, 1.3 million.
Right.
But yes, and I think the key bit for me is getting that number down to a point where we can set a balanced budget that is sustainable as well. So I think your point around sort of when do we hit the buffers, I think the reason everyone's in this room is that they they value and they take real pride in what council does for the borough, and that's what we're here for. And that's where the numbers come in, because you need those to stack up to make those decisions and do the right things. And that's what keeps me away, that we've got a gap. We don't need a gap, because we need to be focusing on it.
Exactly. Thank you, Chair. Just one last thing, if the portfolio holder had been here, further to this last question to Russell, I would have asked him what the contingency plan was of the executive should the MTFS fail, and when can we see that contingency plan as a scrutiny panel?
Well, actually, I was going to say, following on what you're saying, I do think actually this is an issue that needs to come back to us with a sort of more detailed report, and we actually, I think, need to do some almost pre-scrutiny of where this is going. You know, at a level where, you know, we can, the figures are put to us in a slightly more understandable way, that we're not actually looking at the real budget, but where the budget is actually or could be going, sort of thing. So I would actually like us, maybe once we've got through the budget set in place, this one, to in the summer actually have a report on where this is going, and what potential areas there are, so that we have a better understanding of the dangers. But yeah, outside of the sort of scare tactics of this is a reality thing, but this is where the potentials are. I would like to see sometime in one of our summer meetings, if that's all right, that we actually have a more detailed sort of pre-scrutiny of where the worst case scenario, the best case scenario, what contingency we can go, and almost the impact of the potential changes we've got with the organisations as well, because there could well be costs from that. And from that, so I do think that's a piece of work that we should be doing, sort of separate to the actual physical budget. So I think if we could do that. And then I've got one question, if no one else has got anything. Okay, Councillor Pright, then Councillor Welbury.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about the fair funding process, really. The national media has given the impression that government has wanted to use the fair funding review to shift resources from local authorities that they regard as relatively wealthy, mainly in the southern half of the country, to local authorities where their party tends to have the administrations largely in the northern half of the country, and specifically in the metropolitan districts in the north of England. There's been almost no coverage of how the fair funding process has affected people in the middle like us. Could you summarize how it has affected us, and probably the other bits of Lincolnshire which we're going to be yoked to fairly soon?
Yes, for you, Chairman. And this is going to be a slightly bizarre answer, because there are good and bad elements to this. I think in terms of pretty much every action that's been taken, every principle of the change within the fair funding review, if you can call it that, I fundamentally disagree with a large amount of what's being done. And you will, as you rightly say, you see a lot of funding being directed towards metropolitan urban areas and away from areas such as our own, which are a little bit more rural, a little bit more shire based. And I just disagree with that. There's been a significant amount of ministerial discretion used to determine how some of the judgments are made. I don't think anybody would argue that deprivation is a significant issue and something that we ought to be funding as a sector. There are suggestions that the weighting being applied to it is potentially 10 times what you would probably think it should be. So there are some significant moves and in the detail of it, which isn't necessarily making the light of day, that's driving where the funding goes. On the flip side, the settlement could have been a lot worse. And I think if you reflect on the elements what they're including in some of these numbers that are still on screen, in terms of that starting point that the government are assessing against it, it includes the business rate growth values, it includes new homes bonus, the recovery grant is in addition to, so that's on top. So what you do find is that where areas have made significant gains, the protections that are in place around how that funding is being distributed or redistributed potentially means that local authorities don't lose out as much as they can do or would have done. It also creates a potential cliff edge in 3 or 4 years' time. And if it's in the public domain, so I'm probably okay speaking about it. If you look at 2 of our neighbours, one being our partner in East Lindsey, their funding position is more than 15% away from where the government want it to be. So they're at the -5% funding floor. That means they will lose sort of in excess of £1.5 million of funding for next year. And then in years 2 and 3, they were forecast to lose a similar amount, but they're being protected because it's a 1 year only hit, and then it's cash flat from there. In a similar way, the authority I've left, they're in that -5% position as well, which again could be one of our partners going forward, North Stephen. They're losing similar amounts to East Lindsey in terms of the funding that's been lost. What they are able to do though is probably retain a larger share of the income they had previously than could easily have been the case. So I think it's a strange situation I find myself in, where pretty much every decision that's been made I don't like, but the end point is not necessarily a bad one. And that's a slightly odd position to find myself in, where I want to argue against it, but equally careful what you wish for. So it's that's probably a rambling answer to a question, but hopefully gives you a sense of where things are.
Thanks for time being.
Councillor Welbury.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to the conversation that Councillor Dorian had and yourself, Chair, just about AI. I know AI is making great strides with invoice processing, taking costs out, and of course we've just said that pay is one of the biggest areas. It might be a good idea to sort of inform the committee how we feel that's going to impact on the budget figures, introduction of AI. I know some figures around the invoice processing, you know, what it's actually been capable of doing. It'd be nice to know the different areas that it's going into and some kind of strategy as regards pay. Thank you.
Through you, Chairman, and we could probably spend a long time talking about AI. I think there are probably a distinction as well between artificial intelligence and sort of intelligent automation as well. I think there's a lot we can do with systems that doesn't, and not that I'm a Terminator aficionado, but we don't want the machines to take over. And there's probably a lot we can do that makes our lives a lot easier without requiring that additional complexity of full artificial intelligence. You know, whether it's having the right forms and having the right systems that then feed that into the back office function and so on. There's a huge amount that can be done without having to sort of go the full way, if you like. And I think I should say I've not gone into the full detail of what's in there, but there's obviously a lot of activity taking place in terms of service reviews and system reviews and the PSPS transformation programs. So there's a whole host of things going on there which will be using or making better use of technology. And I think that in a world where we exist beyond 2 years, that I think would need to be a key element of what we do going forward in terms of reducing costs and managing demands. whether we can get the payback on some of the investment required to implement it from this point is probably the key bit I'll be looking at in terms of which bits we take for.
And then I've got Councillor Danny.
Mr. Chairman, just a suggestion, because listening to the debate and and the interventions of councillors now, I mean, I totally agree with Councillor Dorian that portfolio holders should be here and probably give us more information what's going on. One of the things probably I would like to suggest, because I mean, we are presented with the budget and sometimes, we're not an expert, financial expert, or, we try our best to understand and give you question and get answers. And from there, we build our idea what's going on. Wouldn't it be nice to have probably an assessment of a risk assessment for our budget and give us a plan B or any other alternatives if something happens, that's where we're going to head, or to prevent it from falling down? Because I think finance and projections for the next year and the third year and fourth year, it's like going to the abyss, especially with our, I think, not the political situations in the country. I mean, we have the Prime Minister who say that we have to be ready for a war. We don't know what's happening. So it just as a suggestion.
And just for me, finally, with again the potential sort of changes that are happening, I mean, are there any sort of dangers we have from pension liabilities and things like that, with staff being made redundant and leaving and things, and how will that affect our budget and how is that covered?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, and I think, yeah, there are, to say, people are our biggest asset, but also our biggest risk and liability potentially. In terms of the pension fund position, I think we've got a small section in the report to talk about the pension triennial review and the benefits that come through that in terms of the funding position. I think there is a risk around reorganisation. In terms of any sort of pension liability, redundancy issues, my expectation is the vast majority of staff who are still with us come sort of reorganisation time will transfer into a new organisation, and it will be that new organisation's responsibility to manage those liabilities if they arise through any change. I think there is probably a further issue that we potentially lose people along the way, and then we need to make sure we can still deliver services whilst we're here delivering them. And that's where we potentially run some more risks, that if you can't get people in some of those sort of regulatory critical function areas, you have to bring people in on a more temporary basis, which can often be more expensive. And that is something that we're quite mindful of, that we need to maintain culture and the comfort of being part of the council and avoid risk or avoid losing people that we don't want to lose. That could make life very difficult very quickly.
So I think now, obviously, our comments have been recorded, and obviously with recommendations will then go forward just cabinet consider. But I do think actually this is an area that we actually need to do more work in. So, so I'd like to see that report. Anybody, any other issues they wish to raise before we move on? Councillor Dorian.
If I may, it is really part of the next agenda item, but given that we've got the officers with us before they shoot off, one of the items that I was going to suggest based on Russell's commentary this evening was that we should identify in our work programme perhaps a scrutiny of the debt held by the other councils that the administration proposes that we join a unitary authority with, or join up with, to form a unitary authority, so that we have a very clear-eyed view of the financial situation that the residents of Boston would be inheriting from the residents of East Lindsey and South Holland respectively. So the reason I bring it up now is to ask Russell, is whether that's doable, because I don't want to put a shed load of work onto your shoulders. I guess it doesn't have to be in the next couple of meetings, and thinking about, you've got 3 budgets to deliver before the end of March. Bless you. So is that something that we could do? Is it something you think the other councils would accede to? Would it ruffle any feathers? Do I care? Not a lot. And how would we go about it really?
Yes, through you, Chairman. Yes, I think in terms of, again, apologies, there are probably two different sorts of debt. So there's, if you like, actual debt where someone's taken a loan out with PWB or the bank of some description. And there's also sort of a need to finance capital expenditure, which is currently being sort of financed from internal resources, so internal borrowing. I think in terms of positions, obviously we know the partnership position, and I think I can't see there being an issue there. I think that we're quite open to sharing that information, and to the point I have no issue saying tonight that East Lindsey don't have any debt, South Holland have no general fund debt, and just under 67.5 million I think is the HRA debt. Obviously the HRA element would be ring fence to the HRA, so it wouldn't impact the taxpayer specifically. So yes, I suppose that what I would say is more than happy to bring something forward. The question might be whether that's the thing we want to focus our time on, without being, we shouldn't be too crude. The debts as they stand will become the issue for the new authority, and based on sort of my knowledge of 3 partnership councils and the 2 Casteves, they're not necessarily in a bad place debt wise. Again, there is debt at North Casteven, but having taken most of it out, I would say it's good debt. And in the main asset backed, it might be, if the committee sort of wish to have a more of a finance focused session, I might suggest if you were after an idea, which obviously you don't have to take on board, I'd maybe be looking at that 1.3 million, going back to the points made earlier around sort of what is the plan, how are we going to close that, what does that mean for the next 2, 3, 5 years, and that might be, this could be a better focus.
Thank you, Russell. Chair, I'm more than happy to take Russell's advice on that. He's got a clear-eyed view of the situation.
Well,
I'm more than happy.
Although I can see how an understanding of that situation would help us take our own decisions forward. So I do think we do need some understanding of that as well, if not in a forensic sort of total level.
And what you suggested is
yeah,
aligns with what you suggested earlier on. So
yeah.
I think, yeah, for the
yeah,
towards the summer period.
yes,
when,
no, I think
yeah.
I think we do need to have a sort of not itemized budget sort of session, but more where the budget is and what potentially having things sort of working, almost like a workshop understanding of how the budget's going, rather than sort of the actual thing. But I think that would be an idea. But yeah, we'll come to that now. But thank you for the report. Thank you for their contribution on that bit, and then we move on to the next item, which is the work programme. So thank you for attending and the information. So you've got in front of you the work programme.
No, Chairman, thank you. Other than the 10th of February, I think is quite a full agenda that members have asked for, particularly with attendance via teams of chief police officers. And then moving through to March, you have the confirmed attendance of Councillor Chain for the highways item from the County Council and quarter 3 transformation, quarter 3 performance. Then you move into April. So anything else you would wish to be added, the clerk and I can take that forward for you, and should anything else be sought to come onto the work programme, that will clearly be routed through the chairman.
Has anybody got any issues Councillor Dory?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, based on a comment I made earlier that the administration is now trying to introduce a change to the Constitution, which, because nobody bothered to read the Constitution, they thought they could play fast and loose with it. However, they were prevented in their efforts on Monday night. But what that does mean is that the monitoring officer has to write a report on any proposed changes to the Constitution, and I really think they should be scrutinised before they're taken forward to full council for ratification. So I appreciate what you say, Andy. It's a very full agenda for February, but could we squeeze it in if that motion on notice is going to the March full council?
A matter for the committee. Should the committee decide, then I'm sure that would be an issue. Members are already aware scrutiny meetings are bound to 3 hours, but by resolution of the committee that can be extended should that be necessary.
Councillor Pierpoint.
I don't think it's necessary, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Danny.
It's a different topic, which is this for agenda. Is that all right?
I have no problem with it being scrutinised personally. I think it's something that we should, although whilst I suppose the argument would be it is a decision of full council rather than a decision of cabinet, but I do think we just need to, if we can put it onto the agenda, I'm happy. But Councillor, right.
Do we know for sure that it is intended to put it to the next council meeting?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If obviously, if it's going, I think before it goes to a full council, it should come to us. Yeah, if it's not going to go to the next, then it would be not as on such busy an agenda. But I do think that really we, as a committee, should look at anything like that. Really, but that's just my view. Councillor Isaac.
So in the past, has it always come to scrutiny, that sort of report?
Well, we've not had that sort of report in my knowledge, but my view always is that, anything that's on the work programme really should, come through scrutiny, because that's how you get the comments. I mean, that's the
Chairman, can we vote on that, whether we want to put it on the... Thank you.
But I mean, for example, there's one that I was concerned about. I actually left it because it was going to full council. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't happy with the way that the council tax support scheme came to, didn't come to scrutiny before it went to cabinet. And so, yes, I do think in general, the assumption should be that anything like that should go through scrutiny, because that's how scrutiny should work. But I'm happy if members don't think there is an argument. I accept that if it's going to full council, it's different to a recommendation to cabinet. Obviously, if it's going to full council, you can at full council discuss an item, which is why I didn't bring the council tax review. Anyway, Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just regarding our work programme, I don't.
Can we just deal with this one first? So the suggestion is that we take that we bring before us the report on the changes to the Constitution. Councillor Dorian.
Thank you. I think my rationale really, Chair, is again, contrary to what was in the motion on notice, is that at full council, there isn't the opportunity for questions and answers of the report author. And I think it really helps flesh out the way it has tonight with Russell and Nicole. It helps flesh out and help members understand all the nuances of a report and all the things that perhaps they can't take at face value. So at a scrutiny panel, as we've done here tonight and every other meeting I've been at, there is opportunity for questions and answers to and fro, and for people to come in more than once, as many of us have done here tonight, which again, you can't do at full council. So if people are, I would say this, if people are so full square behind their motion on notice, what do they have to fear about discussing it in the round at scrutiny?
Anyway, yeah, so those in favour of us scrutinising the Section 151 officers report on the change to the Constitution. Those in favour, please show. Those against? That's lost. Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just regarding our work program, which is, I don't know if it's in our remit, Andy, to check defibrillators around the town and how many we have, because I found out some towns, they had them, but they weren't working. So they pose a risk to the health of people, you know, in case of somebody having a heart attack. We can come to that one.
Chairman, I'll have to say that I am not cognizant of the ownership of those. There's clearly a national registration mechanism. If the committee would be happy, I'll make some inquiries of colleagues that administer the system to see what evidence and data may be available. My understanding is where we as an organisation provide them, I have them tested regularly. I have a specialist contractor that confirms they're still within their operable life. Whether that applies to private sector and third sector organisations that do the same. So if you're happy to leave that with me, if there's anything that can come forward, then I'll help bring that to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. That will be much appreciated if you can do that. Thank you.
Just to flag up again, it is my intention that we will have an informal workshop for this committee at the beginning of the next council year, where we can talk about what other things we want to add into the work programme. As Andy sort of implied, we're actually quite busy, running up now to the end of this council year. But then obviously I do think we need to look at where we're going next year. Councillor Isaac.
Yes, and obviously not for this year because it's a packed agenda as we can already see. But I was wondering whether we could invite the fire brigade in to scrutinise basically the work they do, certainly concerning the recent fire in Switzerland and the fire checks that were supposed to be carried out by a local authority but wasn't. We are very much checked our buildings, and I'm absolutely secure that no council buildings would inherit that. But it's interesting that the fire brigade are given the power to do spot checks on nightclubs, bars and restaurants, and I just wondered whether we could bring them in to find out just how they can manpower that and how many they actually do, and also fire alarms in people's homes, etc., what other help. So
it would be, again, my feeling always is that we need, the more knowledge we have, it might well be we hear from them, we're happy, or we hear from them, we develop some concern. But if you're happy with that to be, for the next council year, an item there, then I think that's perfectly fine. Are members happy with that as a general idea? Yeah. Thank you. So, yep. Yeah, well, we can. Yeah, we can work, and we'll work on how the logistics of it when it becomes a potential thing. So, thank you, everybody. In the absence of any other things, I declare this evening closed. Thank you. Oh, obviously we are going to be starting the review of the new structure.